Luna hadn't expected to end her afternoon pressed flat against a stone pillar while the Alpha King Chang tore a chandelier from the ceiling with his bare hands. But that was exactly where she found herself, a clay jar of calendula paste clutched to her chest like it might save her life. Watching the most powerful man in the realm come apart at the seams. It had started simply enough. Advisor Thormund's shoulder had been acting up again, the stubborn old campaigner, refusing to walk down 3 flights of stairs to the apothecary, like a reasonable person. So Vedra, the head healer, had sent Luna up with a salve and firm instructions to make him actually use it this time. Simple, routine, the kind of errand Luna had done 100 times without incident. She'd pushed open the heavy doors to the Great Hall, expecting to find a roomful of politicians arguing about grain tariffs. What she found instead was carnage in progress. The long oak table had been flipped onto its side, chairs lay splintered across the flagstones. 3 guards stood with their backs against the far wall, swords drawn but held low, their faces locked somewhere between duty and animal terror. Advisor Thormund was crouched behind a marble column with his badged shoulder pressed against the stone. And the irony of that would have been funny if the situation weren't so clearly one wrong breath away from bloodshed. And at the center of it all stood King Tavern Blackmere. Luna had seen the king before from a distance. Everyone in the palace had. He was the kind of man you noticed whether you meant to or not. Tall, broad, built like the warlord he'd been before he inherited the crown, with dark hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of the same granite as the castle walls. He commanded attention the way a storm commanded the sky, and the general palace wisdom was that you kept your head down and your voice quiet when he passed, but this was something else entirely. His shirt was torn at the collar. The muscles in his arms were corded tight, veins standing out beneath his skin, and his eyes, Luna's breath stopped. His eyes were wrong. The deep gray that she'd glimpsed from a distance had been swallowed by molten amber. The wolf staring out from behind a human face that was losing the battle to stay human. His fingers were curled into claws, actual claws, black and curved and digging into the wood of a chair he'd just wrenched from the floor. A low growl filled the room, so deep it vibrated in Luna's ribs. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Luna stood in the open doorway, frozen in place. A jar of medicinal paste in one hand and the door handle still gripped in the other. Every instinct screamed at her to back away slowly, to disappear down the corridor and pretend she'd never been here. But her legs refused to cooperate. King Tavern turned toward the sound of the door. His gaze locked onto her. Luna felt the impact of those amber eyes like a physical blow, a pressure against her sternum that made her heart stutter and her lungs tighten. The growl deepened. The guards shifted, raising their swords an inch higher. And then something happened that Luna would spend the next several weeks trying to understand. The amber in his eyes flickered. His pupils contracted, then expanded, then contracted again, like a candle flame caught between 2 winds. The claws retracted slowly, black fading to blunt human nails. The growl died in his throat and was replaced by rough, ragged breathing. He blinked. Once, twice. The gray returned to his eyes, bleeding back in from the edges like ink dropped in water. His shoulders dropped, his hands unclenched. And he stared at Luna across the wreckage of the great hall with an expression she could not read at all. The silence that followed was so thick Luna could hear her own heartbeat echoing off the walls. Then Brennick moved, the king's Beta, who had been standing just to the left of the overturned table with the careful stillness of a man who had learned exactly how far was far enough. Crossed the room in 4 measured strides. He stopped beside Luna and spoke without looking at her. "Stay exactly where you are." Luna stayed. She could not have moved if the castle itself caught fire. Her knees were shaking so badly that the jar in her hand rattled against the doorframe. Minutes crawled past. The king pressed one hand against his face, dragged it down slowly, and turned away without a word. He walked through a side door and was gone. The guards exhaled in unison. Advisor Thormund rose from behind his column, wincing. Brennick turned to Luna. His face revealed nothing. which somehow made everything worse. "What is your name?" he asked. "Luna," she managed. "From the apothecary. I was delivering a silver at Visir Tormund's shoulder." Brennick studied her for a long moment, his gaze uncomfortably precise. "Stay in the castle tonight," he said. "Don't leave the grounds. I will send for you in the morning." "Am I in trouble?" Luna blurted out. The beta paused, something shifting behind his eyes that might have been surprise. "No," he said. "Not in trouble." He left before she could ask what she was in, if not trouble. Luna stood alone in the ruined great hall, surrounded by broken wood and overturned chairs, and tried to make her hands stop shaking. She failed. That night, she lay in her narrow cot in the apothecary dormitory and stared at the ceiling. Sleep came in thin, restless fragments. She dreamed of amber eyes and claws, and the sound of a growl that made the bones in her chest vibrate. She dreamed of standing in front of the king while he looked at her like she was something impossible, and the dream shifted until she was kneeling before the court in chains. And someone was reading a list of charges she didn't understand. She woke gasping, sheets damp with sweat, to the sound of knocking. A guard stood in the corridor, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Luna," he said, "the king requires your presence." Her stomach dropped through the floor. The room they brought her to was small and windowless, and smelled of old polish and cold stone. Luna sat on a wooden bench, with her hands folded in her lap, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. She'd been waiting long enough for the candle on the wall to burn down by a full inch. When the door opened, it was not the king who entered, but Brennick. Luna's heart lurched sideways with relief and terror in equal measure. "Miss Luna," the beta said. His tone so controlled it gave away nothing. "Thank you for waiting. Is this about yesterday?" Luna asked. And her voice came out smaller than she wanted, in a manner of speaking. Brennick closed the door and stood before her, hands clasped behind his back. "I would like to propose an experiment." Luna stared at him. That was not any of the sentences she had been expecting. "His Majesty has a private study on the upper floor," Brennick continued. "He will be working there this morning, reviewing reports, receiving advisors, routine business." He paused, watching her face. "I would like you to sit in the room while he does so. Sit in the room." Luna repeated, "Yes, with the king, yes." Luna's mind produced a dozen questions, all of them competing for her mouth at once. What came out was, "Why?" Brennick did not answer. Instead, he opened the door and gestured down the corridor. The walk to the king's private study felt approximately 400 miles long. Luna's pulse pounded in her ears with every step. She rehearsed calming breaths the way Vedra had taught her, in through the nose and out through the mouth, steady and measured. They did not help even slightly. Brennick stopped at a heavy oak door and pushed it open. The study beyond was larger than her entire dormitory. Tall shelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound volumes and rolled maps. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. Narrow windows let in gray morning light that pooled on the floor in thin rectangles. Behind the desk, King Tavrin Blackmere sat reading a document. He did not look up. Luna's legs nearly buckled. He was so close, close enough to see the faint scar along his jawline, close enough to notice that his dark hair was slightly longer than regulation, curling just past his collar. Close enough to see the deep shadows beneath his eyes and the tension in his shoulders that looked permanent. "Here," Brennick murmured, guiding her to a chair against the far wall. Luna sat. The chair creaked. The king turned a page and made a note in the margin with a steady hand. He gave no indication whatsoever that she existed. She pressed her palms together in her lap and waited. 10 minutes passed. 2 advisors entered, speaking in low tones about a border dispute with the Ashenmore territories. The king listened, asked a question so quiet Luna barely caught it, and went back to his document. His movements were measured and precise. Nothing about him suggested the snarling, amber-eyed creature from yesterday. 20 minutes. Luna counted the books on the nearest shelf. 43. She counted them again. Still 43. 30 minutes passed, and she saw it. The king's writing hand paused. Not a natural pause between thoughts, but a stiffening, a tension that crept up his wrist and into his forearm. His knuckles whitened around the pen. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Luna held her breath. Tavern's eyes flickered, gray going briefly bright before settling back. His nostrils flared. His shoulders drew up toward his ears. And Luna watched the war play out across his body. The wolf pushing forward, the man pushing back, then his gaze cut sideways toward her. Just for a fraction of a second, their eyes met, and the tension in his body eased. His grip on the pen loosened. His shoulders dropped. The flicker in his eyes died, and the gray held steady. He went back to writing. Luna released the breath she'd been holding so slowly it made her lightheaded. When the last advisor left an hour later, Brennick crossed the room and knelt beside Luna's chair. His voice was pitched for her ears alone. The king's wolf nearly surfaced twice while you were present. Both times it settled on its own. That has not happened before. He studied her face. Do you understand what I am telling you? Luna understood. She wished desperately that she did not. She found Vidra in the apothecary's back room that afternoon, bent over a mortar full of something that smelled aggressively of pine. Luna closed the door, leaned against it, and told her everything. Vedra listened without interruption. When Luna finished, the old healer set down her pestle and wiped her hand slowly on her apron. The episode started 9 months ago, Vedra said, her voice stripped of its usual warmth. After the Ashenmore campaign, His Majesty returned from that war changed. The wolf had always been strong, controlled, disciplined. But something broke during those last battles. The beast began pushing for dominance, and the king has been losing ground ever since. Luna's mouth went dry. Losing ground how? The episodes are increasing in frequency and intensity. 3 months ago, they came once a week. Now it is nearly every day. He shifts partially without meaning to, his temper phrase. His wolf overrides his judgment. We have tried every herb, every tincture, every remedy in the old texts. Nothing works. Vedra paused. And the weight of what she didn't say pressed down on the room. Brennick believes the king has 3 months, she continued. Perhaps less. If the wolf takes full control, the man inside is consumed. There would be nothing left to bring back. 3 months, Luna whispered. And that may be generous. Vedra fixed her with a look that cut through every layer of pretense Luna had ever built around herself. Which is why what happened today is significant. The wolf has never settled voluntarily. Never. Not for healers, not for Brennick, not for anyone. I didn't do anything, Luna protested. I just sat there. Vedra's expression softened, but her eyes remained sharp. Sometimes that is enough. I do not yet understand why your presence affects him. It could be something in your scent, in your wolf's frequency, in the particular combination of herbs you carry on your skin from working here. But I intend to find out. A knock sounded. Brennick appeared in the doorway, his gaze moving from Vedra to Luna and back. The king has agreed to continue the arrangement, he said. Miss Luna will attend his private study each evening until further notice. His eyes settled on Luna. You are not to discuss what you have witnessed with anyone outside this room. Does the king know? Luna asked. About what I do to him. About why it works. His Majesty is aware that something about your presence stabilizes his wolf. Brennick replied carefully. Beyond that, we are all still searching for answers. He paused at the door, his voice dropping half a register. There is one more thing you should know. The episodes are worst at night. They have been worsening after dark for weeks now, and the king has stopped telling us when they happen. The implication crawled down Luna's spine like cold fingers. He has stopped fighting, Vedra said quietly after Brennick had gone. That is what the beta did not say outright. The king is tired, Luna, and tired men stop holding on. Luna stared at her, and for the first time since the Great Hall, what she felt was not fear. It was something much worse. It was the understanding that the most powerful man in the kingdom was quietly giving up, and no one had been able to reach him. The arrangement settled into a pattern faster than Luna expected. Each evening after the palace quieted, she made her way up the winding stone staircase to the king's private study. A guard let her in without comment. She sat in the same chair against the far wall, and the king worked at his desk as though she were another piece of furniture. He did not acknowledge her. He did not greet her, or dismiss her, or look at her directly. She was simply there, like the fire in the hearth, or the draught from the narrow windows, and she tried very hard not to think about how strange it was to be both essential and invisible at the same time. The first week, she brought nothing with her. She sat with her hands folded and stared at the bookshelves, and listened to the scratch of his pen and the pop of burning logs, and tried not to fidget. It was agonizing. Luna was not built for stillness. Her hands were meant to be grinding, sorting, measuring, mixing. Sitting idle made her skin crawl. On the fourth night, she brought a bundle of dried rosemary and a mortar and pestle from the apothecary. She sat up quietly in her corner and began stripping the leaves from the stems with careful fingers. The king didn't look up, but after a few minutes, she noticed his writing had steadied. The faint tremor she'd learned to watch for in his hand had gone still. By the second week, her corner of the study had become its own small workstation. She brought herbs to sort, tinctures to label, notes to organize. The king never commented on it. But one evening she arrived to find a low table set beside her chair, the right height for her work, with a drawer underneath for her supplies. She ran her fingers over the polished wood and looked across the room at the king, who was reading a dispatch with absolute concentration and showed no sign of having arranged anything at all. "Thank you for the table," she said. "I have no idea what you are talking about," King Tavern replied without looking up. Luna bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. The silence between them began to change after that. It was still silence, technically, but it had grown edges, texture. Luna became aware of the king's breathing, the rhythm of it, the way it deepened when he was concentrating hard and went shallow when something in a report displeased him. She noticed that he rubbed his left temple when he was tired, and that his handwriting slanted further to the right as the evening wore on. She noticed that he never ate during these sessions, despite the tray of food that a servant brought and left untouched on the side table every single night. "You should eat," she said one evening, surprising herself. The king's pen stopped. His gaze lifted and found her for the first time in days. The full weight of it landed on her like something physical, and Luna immediately wished she had kept her mouth shut. "I beg your pardon," he said. "The food," Luna continued, because apparently her survival instincts had taken the evening off. "The servant brings it every night, and you never touch it. Vidra says proper nutrition is essential for maintaining control over your wolf, so you should eat." A long, terrible pause followed. Luna braced for anger. "Vedra told you to say that," the king said. "Vedra told me about the nutrition. The nagging is my own contribution." Something shifted in his expression. Not amusement, nothing so dramatic, but the faintest softening around his eyes that might have been the distant relative of amusement in better lighting. He reached for the tray and ate 3 bites of bread. Then he went back to his report. It was the first time he'd done anything she'd asked, and Luna felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. The nights lengthened as autumn pressed forward, and Luna found herself talking more, not deliberately, not strategically, just the way she always did when silence made her nervous, which was always. She told him about the apprentice who had mixed valerian root with blackthorn oil and produced a tincture that smelled so powerfully of rotting fish that the entire east wing of the apothecary had to be evacuated for 2 days. She told him about the castle cat who had learned to open the herb stores and eaten an entire jar of dried catnip and spent the following afternoon batting at invisible butterflies in the courtyard. The king never responded, but she noticed things. The way his pen slowed when she was talking, as if part of his attention had shifted. The way the tension in his shoulders unwound by degrees, like a rope being loosened one thread at a time. The way his breathing, which always started the evening tight and controlled, grew deeper and easier as her voice filled the quiet spaces. One night she paused mid-story and realized his eyes were closed. Not in sleep, just closed, his head tilted back slightly against his chair. his face more peaceful than she had ever seen it. The firelight caught the planes of his cheekbones and softened the hard line of his mouth. And Luna's heart did something it had absolutely no business doing. She looked away quickly and went back to her herbs. Then came the night she was late. Vedra had needed her for an emergency. A guardsman had come in with a gash on his forearm that needed stitching. And by the time Luna had cleaned and sutured and bandaged and washed her hands clean, she was more than an hour past her usual time. She ran up the staircase 2 steps at a time, her heart already pounding before she reached the corridor. She knew before she touched the door. She could feel it through the wood. Wrongness, pressure, the low vibration of a growl that she felt in her teeth more than heard with her ears. She pushed the door open. The study was destroyed. The desk was overturned. Books lay scattered across the floor, spines broken, pages torn. Claw marks raked across the walls in jagged furrows, deep enough that dust still trickled from the gouges. The low table he had placed beside her chair was shattered into pieces, and the king was on the floor. He was pressed against the far wall, his knees drawn up, his head in his hands. His shirt was shredded across the back, and she could see the muscles beneath his skin rippling with the effort of holding the shift at bay. His fingers were clawed, his breathing coming in harsh, wet gasps that sounded like they were being ripped from his chest. His eyes, when he lifted his head at the sound of her entrance, were a battlefield. Gray and amber warring for control, flickering back and forth so rapidly it made Luna's stomach lurch. She didn't think. She crossed the wreckage of the room in 5 strides, dropped to her knees beside him, and took his hand. His claws pressed against her skin, not breaking it, just resting there with a pressure that said the wolf was aware of her, even if the man was barely holding on. Luna wrapped both her hands around his and held firm. "I am here," she said. "I am sorry I was late." The shift fought her for 30 agonizing seconds. She watched it push forward, watched the amber swallow his irises completely, watched the bones in his hands start to reshape beneath her grip. Then it stopped. The amber faded. The claws retracted slowly, like something being coaxed back into hiding. His hand became a hand again, large and rough and trembling inside both of hers, his breathing ragged, steadied, slowed, deepened. King Tavrin looked at her, and what Luna saw in those gray eyes was not the controlled authority of a monarch or the feral hunger of a wolf losing its chain. It was fear, unmasked human fear. The kind that lives in the chest and keeps a person awake at 3 in the morning. The kind that says, "I am becoming something I cannot stop." "I am sorry I was late," Luna whispered again. He did not let go of her hand. They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling in the wreckage, his hand in hers, the fire dying to embers. Neither spoke. Luna listened to his breathing return to something steady and felt the shaking in his fingers gradually still. When Brennick appeared in the doorway, his gaze swept across the destroyed study with the practiced calm of a man who had seen this scene before and expected to see it again. He looked at the king on the floor. He looked at Luna holding his hand. He looked at the wrecked table and the claw marks scored into the walls. "We need to discuss a new arrangement," the beta said quietly. "The adjacent corridor is not close enough." The new arrangement, as Brennick called it with diplomatic understatement, meant that Luna would sleep in the king's chambers, not with the king, in the same room as the king, on a narrow cot pushed against the far wall, separated from the royal bed by 12 feet of floor and whatever remained of Luna's dignity, which at this point was not much. The first evening she stood in the doorway of his chambers, her arms full of bedding from the apothecary dormitory, and tried not to stare. The room's was enormous, the ceiling arched high enough to echo, weapons hung on the walls in precise arrangements. A fire burned in a hearth large enough to stand in, and in the center of it all sat the bed. It was the largest piece of furniture Luna had ever seen, and it made her cot look like something you'd give a dog. "Your Majesty," she said from the doorway, "I have been told to sleep here." King Tevrin stood by the window with his back to her. He did not turn around. "I am aware," he said. "I want you to know that I understand this is purely a medical arrangement." Luna continued, gripping her bundle of blankets. Professional. Practical. Yes, and I will be completely invisible. You will not even know I am here. You have been talking since you arrived. The king observed. Luna shut her mouth. She set up her cot with quick, efficient movements, smoothing the thin blanket and arranging her single pillow with more care than it deserved. She could feel him behind her, the weight of his presence pressing against her back like heat from an open furnace. When she finally turned around, he had moved to the hearth, his forearm braced against the mantel, his gaze fixed on the flames. He looked exhausted. Not the ordinary tiredness of a long day, but something structural, something that lived in the hollows beneath his eyes and the rigid set of his jaw, like a wall holding back floodwater and running out of mortar. Do you have a preference for the fire? Luna asked. Bright or banked? It does not matter. Candles or dark. Luna, her name stopped her. It was the first time he had used it. His voice was low and rough around the edges, and hearing her name in that voice did something to her pulse that she chose to ignore entirely. Stop arranging things and go to sleep. She went to sleep, or tried to. She lay on the cot with her hands pressed flat against her stomach and stared at the ceiling and listened to his breathing from across the room. Deep, controlled, deliberate, the breathing of a man who had to think about every inhale. 20 minutes passed, his breathing changed. Not deeper, but harder. She heard the sheets shift, heard a low sound that wasn't quite a grunt and wasn't quite a growl. And something inside her chest tightened in response. She sat up. The king was rigid on the bed, his hands clenched in the sheets, his head turned to one side. Even in the dim firelight, she could see the tension in his neck, the cords standing out beneath his skin. His wolf was pushing, and in the vulnerable space of almost sleep, his defenses were crumbling. Luna crossed the room before she could talk herself out of it. She knelt beside the bed and reached for his hand. The moment her fingers closed around his, the tension broke. His grip tightened, crushing, his fingers locking around hers with a force that would leave bruises. But the shift receded. His breathing roughened, then steadied. His jaw unclenched, his eyes opened. Gray, fully gray, and fixed on her face with an intensity that made her forget she was kneeling on bare floor in a borrowed nightgown beside the king's bed. I am here, she said quietly. He looked at her hand in his. He didn't let go. Go back to your cot, he said, but his voice carried no authority at all, and his fingers remained locked around hers. If I move, will it come back? Luna asked. The silence that followed was its own answer. Luna shifted until she was sitting on the floor with her back against the side of his bed, her arms stretched up onto the mattress, her hand still in his. It was awkward and uncomfortable, and her shoulder would scream at her by morning. She didn't care. Tell me something, the king said after a while. His voice was scraped clean of its usual control. Anything. It helps when you talk. So she talked. She told him about the time she had accidentally created a batch of cough syrup so potent that the stable master who tried it fell asleep, standing up, and had to be carried to the infirmary by 4 guardsmen. She told him about the feral cat that had adopted the apothecary and terrorized the apprentices, and once stole an entire wheel of cheese from the kitchen. She told him about the night she had been working late and mixed up the labels on 2 identical jars and spent the next morning in a panic, trying to figure out which patients had received digestive tonic and which had received horse liniment. Somewhere in the middle of the horse liniment story, his grip on her hand loosened from desperate to simply holding, and his breathing evened out into something steady and deep. He was asleep. Luna sat on the cold floor and listened to him breathe and felt a warmth in her chest that terrified her. After that night, the cot became an afterthought. She still started each evening on it, still folded her blankets in the morning, and arranged her pillow as though maintaining the fiction mattered. But every night, without fail, the wolf pushed forward in the dark. And every night, Luna crossed the 12 feet of floor and gave the king her hand. It became ritual, unspoken, unacknowledged, essential. His hand would find hers in the dark, their fingers lacing together with a familiarity that grew more natural each night. His breathing would steady. The wolf would settle, and Luna would sit on the floor until her body ached, anchoring him to himself through nothing more than the weight of her hand in his. 3 weeks into the arrangement, she fell asleep on the floor beside his bed, her head tilted against the mattress, her hand still in his. She woke to warmth. Not the warmth of the fire which had burned low, not the warmth of her thin blanket which was still on the cot across the room. This was different. This was the warmth of arms wrapped around her, of a broad chest pressed against her back, of steady breathing against her hair. At some point during the night, the king had pulled her onto the bed. She was lying on the mattress, tucked against him, his arm draped heavy across her waist, his face buried against the back of her neck. His hand was still holding hers, pressed flat against her stomach. Luna's heart hammered so hard she was certain it would wake him. Her wolf stirred. For the first time in her 23 years of life, she felt it move beneath her skin, not restless, not agitated, reaching, pressing forward toward something, toward him, with a certainty that Luna herself did not possess. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe normally, and failed completely. And beneath the panic, beneath the hammering pulse and the heat flooding her skin, something else surfaced, something quiet and deep and terrifyingly honest. She did not want to move. It happened on a Thursday. Luna would remember that because Thursdays were when Vedra received her shipment of dried fennel from the southern provinces, and the entire apothecary smelled of licorice. And Luna had been sore times when Brennick came for her with urgency written into every line of his body. Now, was all he said. She ran. Through the corridors, up the stairs, past startled servants who flattened themselves against the walls. She could feel it before she reached the door, a pressure in the air, thick and wrong, like the moment before a storm breaks. The guards outside his chambers were pale. Luna pushed through the door and stopped. The king was standing in the center of the room, and the wolf was winning. His eyes were fully amber. His hands had shifted, fingers elongated, tipped with black claws that curled toward his palms. The growl that filled the room was lower than anything she had heard before, a sound that lived beneath human hearing and vibrated in the bones of the floor. His shirt was torn, where the shift had warped the shape of his shoulders, and the muscles beneath his skin rippled with a movement that was not human. He turned toward her, the amber eyes locked on, and for one terrible suspended second, Luna was not sure he recognized her. She walked toward him anyway. "Tavern," she said, "not your majesty, not sire," his name plain and unadorned, the way she said it in her own head during the quiet hours of the night. The growl intensified. She kept walking. She reached him and pressed both hands against his chest. The heat of him seared through her palms. His heart was hammering beneath her fingers. Fast and arrhythmic, a heart being torn between two creatures. "Come back," she whispered. His clawed hand came up and gripped her wrist, not gently. The points of his claws dimpled her skin, and she felt one press just hard enough to leave a thin scratch on her skin. The amber eyes stared down at her, and behind them she could see the war. Man and wolf locked together, neither willing to surrender. Luna pressed harder against his chest. She closed her eyes and reached, not with her hands but with something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet, and the world dissolved. She was standing on a field of ash. The sky was the color of a bruise, purple-black and churning with smoke. The ground beneath her feet was scorched earth, cracked and gray, stretching in every direction. The air stung in her lungs, thick with the smell of charred wood and something worse, something organic. Bodies lay scattered across the field. Dozens, more, wolf and human tangled together in the terrible stillness of the dead. Armor split open, banners burned to rags. A village smoldered in the middle distance, its rooftops collapsed into themselves. Thin columns of smoke rising like fingers reaching for help that was never coming. Luna's stomach lurched. "Ashenmore," she breathed. And there in the center of it, standing among the dead with his back to her, was Tavrin. But not the Tavrin she knew. This version of him was battle-scared and weary. His armor was dented and scored with claw marks. His sword hung loose from his hand. And he stood completely still, staring down at something at his feet. Luna moved closer, her bare feet silent on the ash. She didn't want to see what he was looking at. She already knew it would break her heart. It was a boy, young, maybe 14 or 15. Lying on his back in the ash with his eyes open and unseeing, he wore no armor, he carried no weapon, just a leather satchel. The contents spilled across the burned ground: bread, dried meat, a water skin. He'd been bringing supplies, not fighting, a runner, a messenger. A child doing what he was told by people who should have kept him safe. The king's face was carved from stone, but his hands were shaking. "I gave the order," Tavrin said, and his voice was hollow. "Advance on all positions, no exceptions," he swallowed. He was behind their line. "I did not know. I did not check." The dead boy's eyes stared at the bruised sky. Luna felt her own eyes burn. She reached for Tavrin's hand and gripped it hard. "We need to leave," she said. "This is not real. It already happened. You cannot stay here." "I come here every night," he said, and the emptiness in his voice was worse than any scream. "Every night, I stand here and I see his face. And the wolf feeds on it. The guilt makes the wolf stronger. The wolf makes the guilt louder." The ash stirred around them. And Luna felt the presence she'd sensed at the edges of the vision. Something vast and patient, circling, waiting for the king to stop fighting so it could swallow him whole. She pulled his hand, hard. The world snapped. Luna gasped, lurching forward. She was back in the king's chambers, her hands still pressed to his chest. His eyes were gray again. His claws had retracted. He was breathing in harsh, shuddering gulps, his forehead pressed against the top of her head. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "You were there," he finally said. "Yes, you saw, yes." His hands came up and cradled her face. His palms were rough and warm and unsteady. He looked at her with eyes that held nothing back, every wall demolished, every defense stripped bare. "It was a curse," he said, "placed by the wolf witch Morwen after I killed her son Havoc at Ashenmoor. She used my own guilt as the anchor. The wolf feeds on the memory. Every night it grows stronger. Every night I lose a little more ground." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Luna demanded. "Because knowing does not change anything. There is no counter to a guilt-forged curse. The anchor is inside me." He paused. "Or it was." Luna stared at him. "What do you mean, was?" His thumb traced her cheekbone. The gesture was so tender it made her chest ache. "My wolf does not fight you," he said quietly. "It does not resist you or try to push through you. It lies down. It rests. In all the months since Ashenmoor, you are the only thing that has quieted it." He swallowed hard. "And tonight you walked into the place where the curse lives, and you pulled me out. No one has ever done that." He reached into the collar of his torn shirt and drew out a chain. On the end of it hung a ring, dark iron, etched with symbols she didn't recognize, warm from being pressed against his skin. "This is a claiming ring," he said. "A formal bond mark in the old tradition. If you wear this, you are recognized as mine before the court and the kingdom. My anchor. My mate in the eyes of the law." Luna's breath stopped. "If you are going to share my curse," Tavrin said, his voice dropping to something rough and exposed, "then you will share my name, my title, my protection, everything I have." He placed the ring in her palm and closed her fingers around it. The metal was warm and heavy, and it pulsed against her skin like a second heartbeat. Luna looked at the ring. She looked at the king. She looked at the ring again. "I am a nobody apothecary," she whispered. "I own 2 dresses and a mortar and pestle. I am aware the court will lose their minds. The court can take it up with their king." Luna slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had always been waiting there for her hand. The king kissed her forehead, his lips warm and dry and lingering, and Luna closed her eyes and felt the world rearrange itself around a new center of gravity. The court's reaction was swift and merciless. Within 2 days, the whispers had spread through every horror and kitchen and stable yard. The king's anchor, the nobody apothecary who wore the black mirror-claiming ring on her left hand. Luna felt the stairs like needles against her skin every time she walked through the palace. But the ring stayed on her finger. and Tavrin's wolf stayed quiet, and the nights grew calmer. Until the morning Brennick arrived at breakfast with his face set in an expression Luna had learned to dread. A delegation arrived at the eastern gate this morning, the beta said. His voice was neutral in the way that meant everything he was about to say would be the opposite of neutral. Lady Seren of the Asheville bloodline will be joining us at the palace. She carries Anchor lineage. The council requested her presence 3 months ago. Luna looked at the ring on her finger. Brennick's gaze followed hers, and for just a moment, the careful neutrality in his expression cracked. 3 months ago, Luna said slowly. Before you, Brennick confirmed. Lady Seren of the Ashevale bloodline arrived at the palace on a gray morning with an entourage of 12 3 wagons of personal effects and cheekbones that could cut glass. Luna watched from a second-floor window as the procession entered the courtyard. Sirenin descended from her carriage with the practiced grace of a woman who had been raised to enter rooms as though she owned them. She was tall, willowy, with copper hair that caught the pale light and skin that looked like it had never been within 5 feet of a mortar and pestle. Her traveling cloak was embroidered with the Asheville crest, a silver wolf resting beneath an ash tree, and the sight of it made something cold settle in the pit of Luna's stomach. Don't stare, Luna told herself. She kept staring. Beside her, Vedra stood with her arms crossed and her mouth pressed into a thin line. Anchor lineage, Vedra said. The Ashevale family has carried it for generations. It is a hereditary gift. The ability to suppress a feral wolf through proximity and specific blood-borne pheromones. She glanced at Luna. It is extremely rare and extremely well documented. Unlike whatever I do, Luna said. What you do, Vedra replied carefully. We still do not fully understand. That did not help. The formal introduction happened that afternoon in the Great Hall, the same hall where Luna had first walked in on the King mid-episode. The same hall with the same pillars and the same flagstones. Only now the furniture had been replaced, and the claw marks had been polished from the walls. And Luna stood near the back in her second-best dress, with the claiming ring heavy on her finger. Siren approached the king with a deep curtsy and a smile that was warm and respectful and entirely appropriate. She spoke about her family's long history of service to the crown. She spoke about the anchor tradition, the techniques passed down through Asheville women for centuries, the documented success rates. She was articulate and poised and intelligent, and she never once looked at Luna. The king received her graciously. His voice was formal, his posture correct. He glanced at Luna exactly once. A quick, unreadable look that she could not decipher across the width of the hall. That evening, the council met behind closed doors. Luna was not invited. She sat in the apothecary and sorted dried chamomile and tried not to think about what was being discussed. She failed spectacularly. Brennick found her afterward. The council has requested that Lady Sigren be given an opportunity to demonstrate her abilities, he said. His voice was carefully devoid of opinion. The king has agreed, tomorrow morning. Agreed, Luna repeated. The word tasted bitter. It is a trial, Brennick said, nothing more. Luna nodded because she didn't trust her voice. She was not present for the trial. That had been deliberate. Vedra had told her, gently but firmly, that her presence in the room would contaminate the test. Luna understood the science of that. She also understood that standing in a doorway watching another woman do what she did, what she was supposed to do, what she wore a ring for, would have broken something inside her that she couldn't afford to break. So she sat in the apothecary and ground herbs she didn't need and waited. The report came through Vedra 2 hours later. The wolf surfaced during a controlled exercise, the healer said, her tone measured. Lady Sirene employed her technique. The wolf receded within approximately 90 seconds. Luna's hands went still on the mortar. 90 seconds. Her method is different from yours, Vedra continued. She does not calm the wolf. She suppresses it, forces it down. The effect is immediate and measurable. And effective, Luna said. Vedra hesitated. Effect, yes, for now. What does that mean? It means I have concerns about long-term suppression versus natural calming. A wolf forced down repeatedly may eventually push back harder. But that is a theoretical concern, and the council is not interested in theoretical concerns when they have a woman with 3 centuries of documented lineage standing in front of them. Luna pulled the ring off her finger and stared at it. The dark iron caught light from the window, and the symbols etched into its surface seemed to shift in the glow. "Put that back on," Vedra said sharply. Luna slid it back onto her finger. But the weight of it had changed. Over the following days, Seren became a fixture in the palace. She attended council meetings. She dined with the king and his advisors. She walked through the corridors with the quiet confidence of a woman who belonged in every room. Entered, and she was kind to Luna. That was the part that made it unbearable. "You must be the king's anchor." Seren said it when they were finally introduced, her smile genuine and warm. "I have heard so much about you. What you have done for him is remarkable." Luna wanted to hate her. She searched for a reason, any reason, and found nothing. Sireni was not cruel or scheming or duplicitous. She was simply better suited for this role in every measurable way. The whispers in the court grew louder. Luna heard them in fragments as she passed through the corridors. The Asheville woman has centuries of bloodline behind her. An apothecary with no family name, it was always going to be temporary. The council will petition for a formal replacement before the month is out. Each fragment lodged in her chest like a splinter. The nights were the worst. Tavrin still held her hand in the dark. His wolf still settled at her touch. But Luna lay awake long after he fell asleep, staring at the canopy above his bed and feeling the cold certainty growing in her gut that she was a temporary solution in a room that now contained a permanent one. Her wolf, which had been stirring and restless and reaching toward Tavrin for weeks, began to retreat. Luna felt it pulling inward, curling tight, going quiet in a way that ached. The bond that had been building between them, the warmth in her chest, the awareness of him that hummed beneath her skin at all hours was still there. But it felt fragile now, strained, like a thread being pulled from both ends. The migraine started on the 4th day, dull at first, then sharper, settling behind her eyes with a pressure that made the light painful. Her appetite vanished. Her hands shook when she worked, badly enough that Vedra noticed and took the blade away from her during a preparation. "You are unwell," Vedra said. "Not a question. I am fine. You have not eaten in 2 days. You are losing weight. Your hands are unsteady, and your wolf has gone dormant." Vedra's voice hardened. "Don't lie to me, child." Luna pressed her palms flat against the workbench to quiet the shaking. "The bond is incomplete," she said softly. "The claiming ring is a promise, not a seal. Neither of us has spoken what this truly is. And now there is someone else who can do what I do. Only better, and with the right bloodline and the right name. And my wolf knows it." The words came out steady, but saying them aloud made the pain in her chest sharpen into something that stole her breath. Vedra was quiet for a long time. An incomplete bond resisted by one party and strained by external forces will tear the weaker partner apart, the healer finally said. "You know this. You have read the texts." "I am not being torn apart," Luna said. "You collapsed at your workstation yesterday." Luna closed her eyes. "The bond is pulling you toward him," Vedra said gently. "And everything else, the court, the council, Seren, your own belief that you are not enough, is pulling you away. Your body cannot sustain that tension indefinitely. So what are you saying?" Vedra reached across the bench and covered Luna's hands with her own. "I am saying that if you stay and he chooses her, the incomplete bond will consume you. The rejection would not just break your heart, Luna. It would kill you." She paused. "And if you leave on your own terms, before the bond deepens further, you might survive it." Lucinas stared at her mentor's hands over hers and felt the ring pressing cold against her finger. "Might," she whispered. "Might," Vedra confirmed. And the word sat between them like a stone. That evening, Luna passed Kingsley on her way to his chambers and heard voices through the door. She didn't mean to stop. She didn't mean to listen. But her feet betrayed her, and the words reached her before she could force herself to walk on. The anchor lineage is proven, Your Majesty. She recognized the voice. Advisor Calum, the oldest member of the council. Lady Seren's bloodline has served the crown for 300 years. Her technique is documented, reliable, and permanent. With respect, the girl from the apothecary was a stopgap, a fortunate accident. But accidents are not foundations. A pause. Then quieter. A voice she didn't recognize. The Lady Seren herself has expressed willingness to formalize the arrangement. A political union between the Crown and the Ashvale House would stabilize the Northern Territories and provide a permanent solution to the King's condition. Luna waited for the King's voice, waited for him to refuse, to push back, to say something. The silence stretched and broke her. Luna walked away from the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She walked down the corridor, down the stairs, through the courtyard, and into the apothecary. She sat at her workbench and stared at the ring on her finger for a very long time. Then she began to pack. Luna did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her cot in the apothecary dormitory, the room she had not used in weeks, and packed her things by candlelight. There was not much. 2 dresses, a pair of worn leather shoes, her own mortar and pestle, a bundle of dried herbs she had been collecting since she was 14. Her entire life fit into a single canvas bag. The ring sat on her finger, catching the candlelight each time she moved her hands. She kept looking at it, kept turning it with her thumb, feeling the weight, the warmth, the etched symbols that she had never learned to read. It felt like it belonged there. That was what made this so hard. She waited until dawn. The corridors were quiet, the palace still wrapped in the gray stillness of early morning, and her footsteps echoed as she climbed the stairs to the king's chambers one last time. The guards let her pass without question. She was, after all, still wearing the ring. Tavrin was awake. He stood by the window in a loose shirt, his hair uncombed, a half-finished report abandoned on the desk behind him. He turned when she entered, and the look on his face when he saw her nearly broke her resolve. Relief, genuine, unguarded relief, like she was the first good thing he had seen in days. "You were not here last night," he said. His voice was rough with something she didn't want to examine. "No," Luna agreed. She set her canvas bag down by the door. Something shifted in his expression. His gaze dropped to the bag, then returned to her face. "Luna," he said, "what is that?" She had rehearsed this. She had spent the entire night choosing the right words, arranging them in the right order, building the sentence that would set him free. She had practiced saying it without crying. She had failed at that part, but the words themselves were ready. "The council is right," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she had expected. Lady Seren carries 300 years of documented anchor lineage. Her technique works. Her bloodline is appropriate. A union between the crown and the Ashville house would stabilize the north and give you a permanent cure. She swallowed. "I am a temporary solution, Tavrin, a fortunate accident, and you deserve something permanent." The king stared at her. The color drained from his face so slowly she could track its retreat. "What are you saying?" he asked, and his voice was dangerously quiet. Luna pulled the ring from her finger. The absence of its weight was immediate and physical. A cold spot on her sheepskin that spread up her arm and settled into her chest like frost. She crossed the room and placed the ring on the desk between them. The iron clinked softly against the wood. "Give her my place instead," Luna said. The silence that followed was the worst sound she had ever heard. Tavrin looked at the ring on his desk. He looked at her bare hand. He looked at her face, and what she saw in his eyes was not anger or relief or understanding. It was devastation. Complete, annihilating devastation. The kind that lives beneath every controlled surface and waits for the one moment that shatters it. "You cannot be serious," he said. "I am being practical," Luna replied, and the word tasted like ash. "I am being rational. Your wolf responds to her. The council supports her. The kingdom needs stability, not a nobody apothecary who stumbled into something she does not understand." "Luna, stop. I have packed my things." I will leave today. Vedra can manage the transition, and Seren can begin the formal arrangement immediately. The wolf will adjust. It will be better this way. Better for whom? His voice cracked on the last word, and the sound of it nearly brought her to her knees. For you, she whispered. She turned toward the door. Luna. Her name was a command, desperate and stripped of every ounce of royal composure. She heard him move, heard his hand slam flat against the desk, heard the ring rattle against the wood. She did not turn around. If she turned around, she would stay. And if she stayed, she would watch the council replace her piece by piece until there was nothing left. She would watch Siren sit beside the king, sleep beside the king, anchor the king, and the incomplete bond in her chest would tear her apart from the inside. She picked up her canvas bag and walked out the door. The corridor blurred through the tears she had been holding back. She walked fast, then faster, then nearly ran, her bag bouncing against her hip, her breath coming in sharp, wounded gasps. She made it to the servants' staircase before the sound reached her, a roar, not a human sound. A wolf's roar, agonized and shattering, ripping through the walls of the palace with enough force to rattle the windows. It was followed by a crash, then another, then the sound of wood breaking apart, and then screaming. Luna stopped on the staircase, her hand white-knuckled on the railing. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to go back. Her wolf, dormant and curled tight for days, surged forward with a desperation that made her double over. She forced herself down the stairs. She forced herself through the courtyard. She forced herself through the gate. Behind her, the palace erupted into chaos. Luna walked for 3 hours. She walked until the palace disappeared behind the ridge, until the road narrowed to a dirt track through autumn gold forest, until her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed against the base of an oak tree with her bag in her lap and her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold them still. The bond in her chest was screaming, not aching, not pulling, screaming, a tearing, relentless agony that radiated outward from her sternum and wrapped around her ribs like iron bands. She could feel him through it, could feel the wolf raging, could feel the man beneath it drowning, and the guilt of what she had done crashed into her like a wave. She had left to save him. She had left because she believed he deserved better, and in doing so, she had ripped the only anchor his wolf trusted out from beneath him. "What have I done?" she gasped. The hours bled together. She sat against the oak tree as the sun climbed and fell, unable to move, unable to think clearly through the pain in her chest. Her wolf howled inside her, pacing and frantic and furious with her for leaving, and Luna pressed her forehead to her knees and tried to breathe. Back at the palace, she would learn later, the king's wolf had taken full control within minutes of her departure. The episode was the most violent anyone had witnessed. Furniture destroyed, walls scarred, guards thrown aside. Brennick had tried to intervene and been pinned to the floor by 300 pounds of enraged alpha wolf. Siren had been summoned immediately. She had walked into the room, employed her technique, and for 30 seconds it appeared to work. The wolf hesitated. Then it snarled at her with such unbridled fury that she'd stumbled backward into the corridor, shaken. "He doesn't want me." Siren had told Brennick afterward. Her composure cracked for the first time since her arrival. "The wolf does not recognize me. It is looking for someone else." Brennick had stared at her, then turned on his heel and walked to the stables. Luna heard the horse before she saw it, hoofbeats on the dirt track, fast and urgent, growing louder. She lifted her head from her knees. Her vision swimming and saw Brennick dismount at a run. "Get up," the beta said. His face was stripped of its usual calm. What remained was something close to fear. "I left so he could heal," Luna managed, her voice barely audible. "He is not healing," Brennick said, pulling her to her feet. "He has not shifted back. Sereni cannot reach him. The wolf does not want anchor lineage, Luna. It wants you. It has always wanted you. And if you do not come back right now, we are going to lose him." Luna rode behind Brennick with her arms locked around his waist, and the bond in her chest blazing like a lit coal. The horse covered the distance in a fraction of the time she'd walked it, and each stride brought the pain into sharper focus. Not just her own, his. Pouring through the incomplete bond like water through cracked stone, wave after wave of fury and anguish and a desperate, howling need that had no words. The palace courtyard was deserted when they arrived. Every door was shut, every window was dark. Guards stood at the perimeter with weapons drawn and faces tight with fear. And the silence was worse than any sound because beneath it Luna could hear the wolf breathing. Deep, ragged, guttural breaths that vibrated through the stone and into the soles of her feet. "Where is he?" she asked. "The Great Hall," Brennick said. "He went there after the episode started and has not left. We cleared the wing. No one can get close." Luna dismounted on shaking legs. The bond pulled her forward like a hand wrapped around her ribs. "Luna," Brennick caught her arm. His grip was firm, his eyes searching her face. "If you go in there and the wolf does not recognize you, it will kill you." "It will recognize me," Luna said. And she didn't know where the certainty came from, but it filled her lungs like air. She walked across the courtyard, through the doors, down the corridor that she had walked on her very first day, carrying a jar of calendula paste and expecting nothing more complicated than a delivery. The irony would have been funny if she could feel anything beyond the fire in her chest. The doors to the great hall stood open. One was hanging from its hinges. Luna stepped inside. The hall was destroyed. Tables overturned, chairs reduced to kindling, tapestries torn from the walls. Claw marks covered every surface, deep gouges in the stone that spoke of hours of sustained fury. And at the center of it, where the king had stood that first day with amber eyes and black claws, crouched the wolf. He was enormous. Luna had never seen Tavern in his wolf form, and the sheer size of him stole the breath from her lungs. His fur was black, shot through with silver along the spine. His shoulders reached her chest, his eyes blazed amber, fully amber, and when they locked onto her, a growl rolled through the hall that shook dust from the ceiling. Luna did not stop walking. "Tavern," she said. "I am here, I came back." The wolf's lips peeled back from teeth the length of her fingers. The growl deepened, his muscles coiled, and Luna could see the decision forming in his body. Fight or yield, kill or surrender. She knelt. Not submission, something else. She knelt because she wanted her eyes level with his, wanted him to see her face, wanted the wolf to look at her and know that she was not afraid and she was not leaving. Not again. "I am sorry," she said. Her voice thick with tears, she finally stopped fighting. "I am sorry I left. I left because I thought you deserved better than me, and I was wrong. Not because I am enough. Maybe I am and maybe I am not. But because you chose me. Your wolf chose me. And I took that choice away from both of you, because I was too afraid to believe I was worth choosing." The growl wavered. "I have spent entire life giving up my place," Luna continued, the words pouring out now, unguarded and unfiltered. "Giving up my seat, my spot, my turn, my chance. Because I grew up with nothing and no one, and I learned very early that the best way to survive was to take up as little room as possible, to be useful and quiet and easy to replace." She held up her bare hand, the finger where the ring had been. "And when Cyrene arrived and the council said she was better, and the court whispered that this I was temporary, I believed them. Because I have always believed that voice. The one that says someone else deserves this more than you do." The wolf had stopped growling. His amber eyes were fixed on her face, and behind the animal fury Luna could see him, Tavern, watching her, listening. "But I was wrong," she said. "And you were wrong, too. You carry the dead from Ashenmore because you believe a better king would have saved that boy. You let the curse feed on your guilt because some part of you agrees with it. You think you deserve to be punished. And I think I deserve to be replaced, and we are both destroying ourselves with the same lie." Her voice broke on the last word. "So I am asking you to come back," she whispered. "Not because I can save you, I do not know if I can, but because you are mine, Tavern Blackmere, and I am yours, and I am done giving away what belongs to me." The wolf stared at her for one long, suspended moment, then he moved, not an attack. He pressed forward, closed the distance between them, and laid his massive head in her lap. The amber in his eyes flickered, and for the first time, Luna saw both at once. Gray and amber, man and wolf, watching her together from behind the same eyes. Luna buried her hands in his fur and held on. The shift began slowly. Bones reshaping, fur receding, the enormous body contracting and reforming into something human. It was not gentle. She heard him gasp, felt his body shudder, felt his hands grip her arms as the transformation ripped through him. But she held on. And when it was over, Tavrin was kneeling in front of her, human, shaking, his forehead pressed against hers. "You heard the council's proposal," he said, his voice wrecked. "Through the door, you heard Advisor Calum. Yes, you left before you heard my answer." Luna's breath caught. "What?" "I refuse," Tavrin said, and his hands came up to frame her face. His fingers were warm and unsteady against her skin. "I told them that I would sooner abdicate the throne than replace you, that Sereni's bloodline was irrelevant because my wolf had chosen its mate, and no council in any kingdom had the authority to override a bonded claim." His jaw clenched. "And then I came looking for you, and you were gone. The ring was on my desk, and you were gone, and the wolf lost its mind. And so did I." Luna's tears fell freely now. "I didn't know. I didn't hear." "I know." He kissed her forehead, then her temples, then the tracks of her tears. "I should have told you sooner. I should have to plainly instead of assuming you knew. But I am saying it now." He pulled back far enough to look into her eyes. "I do not want anchor lineage. I do not want political stability. I do not want Seren. I want the woman who sat on a cold floor every night and held my hand and told me stories about exploding cough syrup until I forgot to be afraid." Luna laughed through her tears, a wet, broken sound that echoed off the ruined walls of the great hall. "I want you," Tavrin said. "I choose you. And I need you to stop giving yourself away." She kissed him, hard, desperate, salt-tinged with tears. His arms wrapped around her and pulled her against his chest, and she felt the bond in her chest flare from aching pain to fierce warmth, golden and blazing, and she kissed him until neither of them could breathe. When they finally pulled apart, Tavrin reached into his pocket and withdrew the ring. The dark iron gleamed in the gray light falling through the shattered windows. "This belongs to you," he said. Luna held out her hand and he slid it onto her finger. And the weight of it settled back into place like a heartbeat resuming. But even as the warmth of the bond hummed between them, Luna felt the undercurrent beneath it. The wolf was quieter now, calmer, but not at peace. The curse still lived in its bones. The battlefield still waited in the dark. "The curse," she said softly. "It is still there." Tavrin's expression shifted. The softness bled away, replaced by something grim and resolute. "Yes," he said, "and tonight it will be worse. The wolf's episode fed it. My guilt fed it. Morwen's magic is stronger than it has ever been." He paused. "I can feel it pulling already." Luna gripped his hand, "Then we face it together. Tonight, no more running, not from you and not from me." He looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "Together," he agreed. They lay in his bed that night, hand in hand, the fire dimming to embers, and the palace quiet around them. Luna could feel the curse stirring beneath the surface, patient and cold, waiting for sleep to open the door it always opened. Tavrin's thumb traced slow circles against her palm. His breathing was deliberately steady, the controlled rhythm of a man preparing for battle. "When we get there," he said quietly, "it will be worse than before. The dead are louder when the wolf is agitated. I know. If something happens to me, if the wolf takes over while we are inside, you need to let go. Break contact and wake yourself up." "I will not leave you in there," Luna said. "Luna, I already left you once today. I am not doing it again." He squeezed her hand and said nothing. Sleep came slowly, reluctantly, creeping in at the edges of her consciousness like fog through an open window. Luna held Tavrin's hand tighter and let it take her. The battlefield was waiting. The sky was darker than before. The bruise-colored clouds had blackened into something that looked less like sky and more like ceiling, pressing down on the scorched earth with a weight that made Luna's lungs ache. The ash was thicker, the smoke was denser, and the dead were everywhere, They stood in rows this time, hundreds of them, soldiers and civilians and wolves in human form, their eyes hollow, their wounds that would never heal. They stretched in every direction, filling the ruined landscape to the horizon, and their silence was worse than any sound they could have made. Tavrin stood beside her, his hand in hers, his face carved from granite. But she could feel him through the bond. The guilt, vast and crushing, pouring through their connection like black water. It pressed against her ribs, filled her throat, made her eyes sting. "They are louder," he murmured. "Can you hear them?" She could. Not words exactly, but pressure. An accusation without language, a weight of blame that settled over her shoulders and tried to drive her to her knees. "It is not their accusation," Luna said, gripping his hand. "It is yours. The curse takes your guilt and gives it their faces. They are not speaking, Tavrin. You are." He flinched. The rows of dead parted, and the boy stepped forward. The same boy from before, young and thin. His satchel of bread and dried meat spilled at his feet. His eyes were open and empty, and he looked at Tavrin with an expression that held no malice. Just a question, just a quiet, devastating why. Tavrin's hand shook in hers. "I gave the order," he said to the boy. The same words he'd spoken before. "I should have checked. I should have known." "You could not have known," Luna said firmly. "The battle was chaos. You made a decision with the information you had, and it was the wrong one, and a boy died, and that is a tragedy. But it is not a debt you can repay by destroying yourself." "You don't understand," Tavrin whispered. "He was not the only one. There were others. Families in the settlement. Women and children who could not flee in time. I ordered the advance and they died because of it." "They died because of war," Luna said. "Because Havoc's wolves raided your villages for 3 years and killed your people, and you tried every other option first. You offered peace. You offered terms. And when everything else I failed, you fought. And it was terrible. And people died who should not have died. That is true. That is real. And it will never be okay." She turned to face him fully, taking both his hands. "But you did not start that war. You did not want that war. You carry every single death on your shoulders as though you dealt the blow yourself. And the curse knows that. It knows you will never forgive yourself. That is what feeds it, not the dead. Your refusal to let them go." The dead stirred. Their hollow eyes shifted, and for the first time, Luna saw something other than accusation in them. She saw exhaustion. These ghosts were as trapped as he was, bound to this place by his guilt, unable to rest because he would not release them. "You are keeping them here," Luna realized aloud. "They cannot move on because you will not let yourself move on." Tavrin's face crumpled. "I know what that feels like," Luna said softly. "I spent my whole life carrying the belief that I was not enough. That my parents left me because I was not worth keeping. That every good thing I had was borrowed and would eventually be taken back." She lifted their joined hands between them. "I gave back your ring this morning because I believed, truly believed, that Sireni deserved it more than I did, that I was taking up space that belonged to someone better." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "We do the same thing, you and I. We punish ourselves for things that were never our fault, and we call it responsibility. We call it humility. But it is not. It is fear. Fear that if we forgive ourselves, if we accept that we did our best and it was not enough, then we have to live with the randomness of it, the meaninglessness. And that is terrifying." The dead boy looked at Luna, then he looked at Tavrin. And for the first time, his expression shifted from hollow emptiness to something else, something almost like compassion. "You are allowed to grieve," Luna told Tavrin, tears streaming down her face. "You are allowed to remember them and honor them and carry them gently. But you are not allowed to use their deaths as a weapon against yourself. That is not justice. That is not atonement. That is just pain dressed up as punishment, and they deserve better than being your instruments of self-destruction." She looked at the dead. "And so do you," she said to them. "You deserve to rest." The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before in this place. It was not oppressive or suffocating or wrong. It was the silence of something letting go. Tavrin dropped to his knees. The sound that came from him was not a word. It was deeper than that, older. A grief that had been locked behind walls of guilt and duty and iron control for so long that releasing it felt like tearing open a wound that had healed wrong. "I am sorry," he said to the boy, to the rows of dead, to the ash and smoke and ruined sky. "I am sorry I could not save you. I am sorry I tried to carry you instead of letting you go. I am sorry I kept you here." The boy knelt in front of the king. He reached out, and his hand, translucent and fading, touched Tavrin's cheek, a gesture of forgiveness that needed no words. Then he was gone. One by one, the dead turned away. They dissolved into the ash like smoke into air, their forms losing shape and substance, their hollow eyes closing. The rose thinned, the weight lifted, the sky lightened from black to gray, to something that might, in another world, become blue. The battlefield faded, the ash thinned to mist, the mist thinned to nothing, and in the emptiness that remained, Luna felt something shift inside Tavrin. Not in his mind or his heart, but deeper, in the place where the wolf lived, where man and beast had been at war for 9 months. Something fundamental changed. The wolf did not retreat. The man did not dominate. Instead, for the first time since Ashenmoor, they turned toward each other and recognized not an enemy but a partner. Luna felt it through the bond like a lock turning, like a door opening, like the first breath after nearly drowning. They woke together. The king's chambers were warm with firelight, and dawn was still hours away. Tavrin's arms were around her, and his face was wet with tears. And he was smiling, a real smile, small and fragile and radiant, with something she had never seen on his face before: peace. Luna kissed his tears away, one by one, and he held her like she was the only solid thing in the world. And they lay together in the warm dark and breathed. The curse did not dissolve overnight. That was not how these things worked. And both of them knew it. Tavrin still had difficult nights. The wolf still stirred when the memories pressed too close. And there were mornings when Luna woke to find his hands clenched in the sheets, his jaw tight, the echoes of Ashenmoor playing behind his closed eyes. But each time she was there. She held his hand or pressed her forehead to his shoulder or simply talked until the tension bled away, and each time the wolf settled faster. The episode stopped entirely by the second month. Not suppressed, not forced down, but genuinely gone. Man and wolf had found their rhythm, and Luna's presence was no longer a leash. It was simply home. Sirens left the palace 3 weeks after the night in the Great Hall. She sought Luna out on the morning of her departure, standing in the apothecary doorway with her copper hair pinned beneath a traveling hood. "I knew," Seren said simply. "From the first day I arrived, I could feel the bond between you and the king. Anchor lineage can sense these things." She smiled, and it held no bitterness. "My technique would have suppressed his wolf. Yours saved it. Those are very different things." Luna thanked her and meant it, and watched the Asheville delegation ride out through the eastern gate. The court adjusted, slowly, reluctantly, with the particular stubbornness of institutions confronted by realities they had not anticipated. A foundling apothecary as the Alpha King's bonded mate was not what the council had envisioned. But the king's health was undeniable. His authority was absolute, and Luna's ring stayed firmly on her finger. Their mating ceremony was held on the first day of winter, in the great hall that had been rebuilt and restored. Luna stood before the court in a gown she had not borrowed, beside a king who held her hand like he would never let go, and spoke vows that she meant with every cell of her body. "They will get used to it." Tavrin murmured against her temple that night, holding her close in their chambers. "And if they do not, then they can take it up with their king, who is unreasonably and permanently devoted to his pist." Months later, on a quiet morning in early spring, Luna woke slowly to pale light filtering through the curtains. Tavren was still asleep beside her, his face peaceful, his breathing deep and steady. One arm was draped across her waist, his hand resting over hers, the claiming ring warm between their intertwined fingers. No nightmares. No amber eyes, no wolves drowning in guilt, just a man sleeping beside the woman who had taught him how to put the dead to rest. Luna watched him for a moment, warmth blooming in her chest. Then she settled back against his shoulder, closed her eyes, and slept.